Chapter 41. Team Higgs. Lucas picked up his phone and opened the Hickok social media app. There were videos of men fighting with each other using their abilities. One group of men were wearing black while the other group, the security forces, were in their full gear. The attacks had caught the security forces by surprise and some were badly hurt. It was happening everywhere, even in the Awaken Center. The news was also playing warnings for everyone to stay in their places before the disturbance would be put down. Boom! A loud explosion could be heard just as Lucas watched the video of men storming into the Awaken Center. Harrianto ran up from the basement and shouted, "Trouble incoming!" Footsteps could then be heard as men wearing black approached the building where they were. "Everyone, get ready!" Riley shouted and they stood in front of Lucas. Arg! The fence electrocuted the men when they held onto it to try and climb into the area. "Useless fools!" A man's voice shouted and boom. An explosion erupted and a part of the fence was brought down. The man who was leading them then waved for the rest of the men to rush in from the opening. Riley and the team ran out and got ready to face these men. Lucas followed closely behind. Rex turned back and said, "Don't worry, we can take care of them in a jiffy." When the men got through the fence, the parts from the fence which were blown off started moving and they shot at the men. Arg! The men cried out in pain. The shrapnel from the fence had pierced through their bodies. Seeing what had happened to those in front of them, the other men in black hesitated. Thud! The leader of the men kicked them from behind and caused them to fall flat on their faces. Cowards! He lunged through the opening in the fence and a few other men and women followed. Spikes made of rock shot out from the ground at them and they stopped in their tracks. Crack! They smashed the rocky spikes and the rocks cracked into pieces. "Riley, I don't want any trouble. Just hand over that young man over there and we will leave peacefully. Why risk your team for a young man? I know how you always take care of your team members." The man who was burly but had eerie scars and depressions all over his body said. Riley shook his head and brushed his long blue hair. "Higgs, my old friend. You should have stayed dead after you tried to backstab our team for some demonic beast core. And it seems like you've not learned the lesson," Riley said and gave a thumbs down to Higgs, the leader of the opposing team. As Riley spoke, Lucas felt static and the hair on his arms stood up. Harrianto glanced back at him, and with his chin pointed towards the back, signaling him to get ready to leap backwards at any moment. Lucas nodded slightly. "Enough. Let's do it the hard way since you want it." Higgs got triggered and lunged at Riley. Rex, Harrianto, and Emma leaped backwards, and Lucas quickly followed suit. Crackle. Wind started blowing and crackling sounds could be heard. A flash of bright lightning appeared from Riley's hand. Lucas had to cover his eyes from the bright light. The lightning shot at Higgs, and it was too fast for Higgs to dodge. Bladder. It had blown off Higgs's left arm. Lucas was surprised by the lightning. He recalled that Riley didn't seem to be so powerful when he was attempting the training sequence. A thought came across Lucas's mind. Riley must have been downplaying his ability all this while. However, it was not over. Higgs didn't cry out in pain but smirked at Riley. The next moment he picked up some of the flesh on the ground at Riley. When the flesh got near Riley, they exploded. Boom! Riley got hurled backwards from the explosion's shockwave. Emma quickly held onto Riley and shouted at Rex, "Do your job!" Rex, whose body had now turned into rocks, stepped forward and plunged his hands into the ground. When Higgs and the other members from his team tried to get nearer, a huge wall made of rocks rose from the ground. A woman in dark nurse attire picked up Higgs's left arm, ran up to Higgs and placed it where it should be. She hovered her hand over where the arm disconnected. A white glow appeared from her hand and onto the wounds of Higgs. The flesh wriggled and grew. Soon, the arm was attached back onto Higgs's body. Higgs swung his arm to test it and he was satisfied. A man who had iron spikes all over his body like a porcupine ran up to the rock wall with all his might. Smash! The iron porcupine man smashed into the wall and parts of the wall crumpled. But from the opening, red smoke appeared, and the iron porcupine man screamed out in pain. Some of the red smoke had caught his eyes. Dark Nurse quickly pulled the Iron Porcupine Man back. She hovered her hands over the Iron Porcupine Man's eyes and started to heal him. Luna, wait for the opportunity to take care of the young man. Higgs shouted at a woman who had 2 swords in each of her hands. She was the weakest amongst his team members, but he figured that Lucas, as an SSS level who had just awakened, should be at novice mastery. And Luna, who was at SS level with master level of mastery, was enough to deal with him. He then plunged his hands into his thigh and tore out a piece of flesh from it. With the piece of flesh, he threw it at the rock wall that was obstructing their way. Boom! The piece of flesh gave out a bigger explosion than before. Crumble. The rock wall began crumbling down. A man that was exceptionally thin stepped forward this time, and he swiped his hand horizontally across at Riley's team. A gust of wind blew, and Lucas felt his cheek sliced open by the wind. He quickly ducked as he saw the thin man swiping his hand horizontally across again. Chapter 42. Phone rings. Slice. Another gust of wind sliced across again. Lucas and the other team members ducked and dodged the slicing wind. But it was enough time for Higgs's team to move in. Higgs lunged at Riley, and Rex knocked Riley out of the way with his shoulder made of rocks. The Iron Porcupine Man rolled himself up and rolled towards Emma. Haryanto stepped in front of Lucas when the thin man lunged at him. The fence crumbled down, and it merged back together into a figure of a man. It lunged at the thin man, and the thin man had to stop and turn around to unleash a slicing wind at it. Slice. The slicing wind sliced the figure made of the fence into halves. But it was near enough for the figure to electrocute the thin man. The thin man was stunned for a moment as smoke began to come out from his hair. A white glow engulfed the thin man as the Dark Nurse held up her hands at him from afar. Haryanto lunged at the thin man, and the pieces of the fence moved and flew onto his body. He was then covered up with pieces of the fence like armor. Thud! Haryanto's punch landed, and it sent the thin man hurled across the ground. Lucas took the opportunity to lunge at the Dark Nurse. She would be healing Higgs's team and making it difficult for everyone if she wasn't dealt with first. With his strength at level 4, he was twice as fast as he was. Lucas left behind a shimmer of his image as he traveled across towards the Dark Nurse. Crack. The Dark Nurse was helpless, and Lucas's punch landed on her chest. A loud crack could be heard when the ribcage of the Dark Nurse fractured. Lucas wanted to go in for the kill, but he felt a gust of wind coming from behind. Slice. He squatted down, and 2 swords cut across where he was standing a moment ago. A celestial glow covered the sword's blades. Lucas saw the swords stopped and turned upwards before they came down at him. Yang! He conjured up a huge ice spike and shot it at the swords slicing down at him, causing the swords to give out a loud metallic ring. Luna was surprised with her mouth opened wide. It can't be. The information given to them was that Lucas had some form of ability that made him strong and was able to heal. But what happened couldn't be possible. Lucas had just wielded ice ability to fend off her swords. She quickly pulled back her swords, preparing to thrust them at Lucas. What the hell? Luna shouted in horror as she struggled to move her arms. Unknowingly, Lucas had used his shadow and held onto the shadow of her arms. She tried to give Lucas a frontal kick when he stood up and walked towards her. The Dark Nurse, trying to help Luna, came from behind and tried to gouge out Lucas's eyes. But when her fingers got near Lucas's face, she felt chills, and before she knew it, her fingers were frozen hard. Lucas lowered his head and smashed his forehead against her frozen fingers. The frozen fingers broke into pieces, and the Dark Nurse gave out a loud cry in pain. An ice spike appeared on Lucas's right hand, and he swung his hand back. Bladder. The ice spike plunged into the Dark Nurse's neck, and the warm blood started seeping out, dripping onto the ground. Lucas pulled out his hand, and he turned his focus back onto Luna. Crack. Before Luna could raise her leg and kick at him, Lucas stepped onto her leg and broke it, giving out a loud crack. Arg! Please no! She gave out a cry in pain and begged for her life. Lucas ignored her plea, and he placed his hand onto her forehead. The temperature dropped immediately. Luna shivered from fear and cold as she knew what was in store for her. A white mist appeared and covered her head. Her trembling body stopped shivering as her head got frozen. Lucas then pulled back his fist and punched at her frozen head. Crack. Her head broke into pieces after Lucas's fist got through it. A familiar sound erupted in Lucas's mind. Ding! Slaughter points plus 600. Current slaughter points 600/7000. Host level 4. Current abilities 4. SSS level physique. SSS level shadow wielder. SSS level summoner. SSS level ice ability. Lucas felt a surge of energy coming into his body with the increase in slaughter points. He looked up and glanced at the other team members. Haryanto was just done with the thin man, with his armor made out of the electric fence now in tattered pieces. The Iron Porcupine Man was now just a puddle of flesh and blood on the ground. Emma had used her poison ability to break the Iron Porcupine Man down into a puddle. Boom! Higgs threw out another piece of his flesh at Riley, but Rex protected Riley with a rock wall. Now, Higgs had wounds all over his body from him using his ability of making explosives out of his flesh. He glanced over and saw that the Dark Nurse had died. Only one thought was in his mind. Run. It was over for him without the Dark Nurse. But he was stumped when he saw Lucas still alive. And Luna's body lying motionless with her head blown off seemed surreal to him. He shouldn't have taken on the mission from Pac-Min-Jae. But the lure of riches and revenge on Riley's team was too seductive for him. No, Riley, listen to me. Higgs tried to stall for time when he saw Riley with flashes of bright light coming up to him. Bam! The lightning shot at Higgs and a loud explosion ensued. Boom! Higgs's body exploded into pieces and strewn all over the surroundings. Riley brushed his long blue hair and said to the rest of the team, "Everyone all right?" The other team members sat down on the ground tired as they tried to catch their breath and said, "Hope that's the end of it." Riley's phone, however, rang again. Chapter 43, Striking Back. The men who came with Higgs's team stood outside looking at each other. They didn't know what to do next. Some hesitated for a moment before turning around and starting to run. Bang! Shots started to fire upon them. Arg! They cried out in pain as the bullets hit them. All of them held their hands up and knelt on the ground. Footsteps marching in unison were heard, and they got louder and louder as the security forces approached. The security forces got to work. Handcuffing the men dressed in black and armor vehicles moved in. Meanwhile, Riley was on the phone speaking with Rodney. The situation is more or less under control in the city. The security force with the activated soldiers were able to deal with Pac-Min-Jae's men. Rodney said on the other end of the call, and Riley could hear Rodney pounding angrily on his desk. "I want your team to get to Pac-Min-Jae's place and bring him to justice. There will be a $1 million reward for bringing me his head." The other awakened teams would be offered the same, of course. "What about Lucas?" Riley asked. "The threat is over for him. Pac-Min-Jae cares more for his own life than anything else now. Bring him with you if you really want him to be on your team. No harm in getting used to each other as soon as possible. He is already part of the team." Riley replied and glanced over at Lucas. He ended the call with Rodney and walked over to Lucas. "Well done," Riley said and patted Lucas on his shoulder. He was impressed that Lucas didn't panic and was able to deal with the situation calmly. However, he startled when he saw the wounds and pieces of Luna's head. They looked like wounds that Ice ability awakened inflicted. But from what he remembered, Lucas's ability was something else. Riley frowned and glanced over at Haryanto. Haryanto nodded, confirming Riley's speculation. And all the other members of the team glanced at Lucas. Lucas slapped the back of his head and said, "I think the cat is out of the bag. Yes, I have 2 SSS-level abilities. One way to not let others know about all your secrets was to voluntarily give them one truth. And they would not think about whether you have other secrets hidden from them." It worked as they focused on Lucas's SSS-level ice ability. "Riley, do you have any idea about this?" Rex asked. But Riley shook his head with his hand brushing and tidying his long blue hair. Now is not the time. There is a mission with a $1 million reward for the head of Pak Min-jae. Is everyone still up for it? Riley asked. Everyone's eyes opened up wide and sparkled when they heard the reward, including Lucas. All of them nodded their heads. Pack whatever you need. We move out in 5 minutes. Every awakened team would be out for the reward, so we better hurry. Riley said, and everyone got back to their rooms to get ready. Lucas got back to his room, put on the Dark Matter Vault armor and summoned Sheba out from his summoner space. He took out the breakfast he had kept in the Dark Matter Vault armor and gave it to Sheba. Sheba slurped and swallowed the breakfast in one go. It tilted its head and glanced at Lucas, anticipating more. But to its disappointment, Lucas shook his head and said, "That's all I can get for the morning. I promise to give you a treat after we are done with Pak Min-jae." Sheba lowered its head and nodded. Lucas patted its head and summoned Sheba back into his summoner space. When he got down to the first floor, everyone except Haryanto was waiting for him. Haryanto was at the driveway in an armored truck with a mounted gun on top. Team Riley, time to pay back. Riley led the others and mounted into the armored truck. Lucas, stay close to Haryanto, follow his instructions. If you don't feel confident or have any issues, let him know. Riley said and gave out instructions for the others. A map of the Pak family mansion was sent to everyone's phone, and he briefed them on the plan of attack. The Pak family mansion was built like an ancient city with an outer wall and inner wall. Pak Min-jae must have been hiding behind his men within the inner wall. They would wait for the other awakened teams to expend the forces of the Pak family. Haryanto would use his ability to connect to the electronics, especially the CCTV or surveillance equipment in the Pak family mansion, to find out Pak Min-jae's location. And while Haryanto was connected to the electronics network, he would need to be protected from harm. Lucas understood the trust that Riley and Haryanto had put in him for them to task him with it. Along the ride towards the Pak family mansion, there was carnage and damage all over. Bodies lay on the ground, both from Pak Min-jae's men and the security forces. Soldiers stood on alert, keeping the order. They let the armored truck through after verifying that Lucas and the team were on the way to deal with Pak Min-jae. Outside of the city, teams of men dressed in full gear were planting devices into the ground. When they were done, they activated the devices and quickly ran away. The devices turned on with their blinking lights. Unseen to the eyes, a sound wave was being transmitted out by the devices. "Bro, I need a breather," one of the men in full gear called out to the others. "What do you think you are doing? Run." The men in front turned back, shouted at the man, and continued running. "Bro, I can't do it, bro." When he finished his sentence, he felt the earth tremble. The man looked back at where they planted the device. Swarms of demonic beasts had appeared and moved towards the direction of the city. Chapter 44. Albert's Sweetheart. North of the city, secret underground base. Soldiers within the perimeter stood on full alert. They saw the columns of smoke that weren't too far away and got worried. "Relax. I've been here for so many years. No one wants to come to this god-forsaken place. Look around you. There's nothing here of interest." A soldier with his untidy uniform took out a cigarette and lit it up. The other soldiers looked around and nodded. There was indeed nothing else but rocks and sand. They had no idea why this place had to be under security all the time. Something might have been underneath the underground base, but no one had any idea. Besides, the soldier in his untidy uniform drew a deep breath and puffed out a mouthful of smoke and said, "There's General Zephyr to take care of things." The other soldiers felt better after hearing what the soldier in the untidy uniform said, and they gave out a sigh of relief. General Zephyr, with his SSS-level fire ability, could burn and carbonize anything that comes near him. Rumor has it that he was able to deal with a high-tiered demonic beast alone. The soldier in his untidy uniform side-eyed the other soldiers, and when he saw they were off guard, he made his move. Eerily, his hand stretched and turned longer. His right hand dropped onto the ground, and it stretched out all the way, along the line of soldiers standing, from the back, as if it was made of rubber. Whip! The soldier in his untidy uniform whipped his left hand and it stretched out all the way from the front of the soldiers. This caught the soldiers by surprise. He tugged and pulled with his rubbery hand. Thud! All the soldiers fell onto the ground. He stepped onto the heads of the fallen soldiers. Bladder! Even their helmets weren't able to protect their heads from his stomps. The heads were stomped into a mangled mass with blood pooling beneath the ground. Tui! When he finished off all of them, the soldier in untidy uniform spat out the cigarette in his mouth and gave out a loud whistle. Engine noises could be heard in the distance, and they approached nearer. Awaken Center. Rodney drew a deep breath, and his cigar burnt brightly, giving out an amber glow on his face. There were staff running around, clearing up the mess that the fighting earlier had left behind. One of them dragged a body of Pack's men along and left a trail of blood behind. "You idiot! Can't you see you are making it worse?" Rodney took out his cigar and shouted at him. He said and stopped himself. After Pack's men had attacked, that was something at the back of his mind. There was something off about Pak Min-jae's unusual behavior. Pak Min-jae, as a sly old fox, would have known that he would fail as soon as the soldiers moved in. As soon as the soldiers moved in, Rodney mumbled to himself, and it finally struck him. Pak Min-jae's objective wasn't to find Lucas and exact revenge on him. He had wanted the soldiers to be diverted away. His heart sank at the reality of what this might mean. Get the soldiers back to the city wall. Hurry! Rodney held onto the captain standing beside him by his arms and shook him. The captain nodded and Rodney released his grip on the captain's arm. Rodney picked up his phone and made a call to the governor. "What do you want?" "I'm busy reporting to the central administration," the governor said impatiently. There were so many issues and questions he had to answer. "Forget about them. We have a bigger problem on our hands," Rodney said and gave out a long sigh. "Isn't everything under control now?" the governor asked. Rodney then briefed the governor on what he had figured out. Plop! The sound of the governor's phone dropping could be heard on Rodney's end. When the governor picked up his phone again, he stammered and said, "Activate procedure for Recon Red immediately." Rodney turned over to his secretary and gave out his orders. "Send out alert and get all the civilians to the underground shelters." He took out his pistol and checked that it was loaded and glanced over at the captain. The captain left with Rodney, and they headed towards the direction of the wall protecting the city from the demonic beasts. The troops stopped what they were doing, and they were perturbed at the sudden order for them to head back. Their tunners moved in convoys, orderly one after another. Rodney glanced at his phone, looking at a contact which had the same address as Albert. He drew a long breath from his cigar, puffed out and gave out a long sigh. Finally, he decided to put his phone back into his pocket. It was up to Albert to protect her. He thought silently to himself. Meanwhile, before Rodney figured out Pak Min-jae's objective, at the Pak family mansion, Lucas and the team arrived and they alighted from the armored truck. When the other awakened teams saw Riley's team with Lucas, their hopes of getting it were dashed immediately. How can they compete against Riley's team? They thought. And to make it worse, the young man who broke the record for the training sequence was on their team now. They looked at the insignia on Lucas's left shoulder and side. With Lucas's chibi face on the insignia, it was confirmed to them that Lucas had indeed joined Riley's team. Boom! An explosion erupted nearby Lucas and the team. The other awakened teams got to work fighting against the men from the Pak family. To their surprise, Riley's team wasn't eager, and they saw them standing behind. This gave them hope and they fought more valiantly with the Pak family's men. Arg! The Pak family's men were heavily outnumbered and the awakened teams with the promise of a $1 million went all in with their abilities and weapons. Lucas and the team followed behind the other awakened teams and entered the Pak family mansion's huge front gate. But they stopped at the security booth, which was partially destroyed now. Riley, Emma and Rex fanned out and stood on guard while Lucas stayed with Haryanto. Haryanto then placed his hand onto the control panel of the CCTV network. Chapter 45 Bubbles. Haryanto's hand glowed and the glow extended into the control panel. Imagery from all the cameras installed by the Pak family came into his mind. His eyes darted from left to right furiously as he searched for the whereabouts of Pak Min-jae. Lucas stood on high alert next to him. Boom! Explosions could be heard nearby. Some of the awakened teams that had entered the Pak family earlier came scurrying out. Many were hurt by the explosives that were planted within the Pak family mansion. One of them came crawling out as flames burned his body. Help! He raised his hand crying for help, but it was too late for him. Plop! His hand fell onto the ground and he stopped moving. An old man with a head of gray hair and long beard came from behind and kicked the body away. This is what you get for trying to desecrate the Pak family. He stood and stared at Lucas and the other team members. The old man raised his hands and small bubbles, the size of a coin, appeared and floated towards Lucas and the other team members. Men in full gear came rushing out with machine guns in their hands from behind the old man. Rex stepped in front and plunged his hands into the ground. Crumble. A wall made of rocks rose from the ground. Boom! The bubbles when they reached the rock wall exploded and the rock wall blew into pieces. Debris from the rock wall flew in all directions and the men in full gear had to stop and wait for it to settle to have visual sight. Bam! A bright flash appeared and they quickly covered their eyes. Riley had unleashed a lightning strike at them. Sizzle. Many of them were fried by the lightning strike. One of the men near Lucas got lucky and survived. He threw a grenade at Lucas and opened fire. Lucas used his SSS-level ice ability, and an ice barrier engulfed the security booth. He also used his shadow and grabbed onto the grenade's shadow. The grenade stopped in midair. What the hell? The man in full gear looked up and said in shock. And before he could react, the grenade came flying back at him. Boom! The grenade exploded in midair and the ball bearings with the shrapnel shot through the man's armor. The man tried to conjure up a defensive shield with his ability, but it was too late. Stop him! When the old man saw Haryanto doing something to the control panel, he shouted at the remaining men, and they turned their attention towards Lucas and Haryanto. Emma blew her poison smoke at the old man, and he raised his hand, and a bubble slowly became larger and larger until it engulfed the old man inside it. The red smoke couldn't get through the huge bubble, and the bubble slowly floated into the air. Wham! Riley raised his hand and unleashed a lightning strike at the old man floating up in the air. Bang! The men fired their automatic rifles at the ice barrier covering Lucas and Haryanto. Shards of ice from the ice barrier were chipped off slowly. Lucas raised his hand and ice spikes as big as an adult appeared above the ice barrier. The men in full gear changed their aim and tried to shoot at the ice spikes. One of them kept his weapon and hurled fireballs at the ice spikes with his B-level fire ability. Poof! The fireball wasn't powerful enough to cause any damage to Lucas's ice spikes, and they went up in a poof of smoke after they hit the ice spikes. The difference between the level of their abilities was too wide. Bladder. The ice spikes shot at the men in full gear and plunged through their armor and body. Soon, only their bodies that were in pieces lay motionless on the ground. Thanks for the aircon. Haryanto was done, and he said as he shivered from the cold. Lucas quickly brought down the ice barrier. They glanced over and Riley, Rex with Emma were still dealing with the old man. The old man, now had only one arm left, had bubbles floating all around him. Boom! Rex tried to move towards the old man but had to leap back after some of the bubbles near him exploded. Lucas raised his hand and conjured an ice spike above the old man. He flagged his hand down, and the ice spike shot at the old man. The old man saw the shadow of the ice spike from above and quickly reacted. Bubbles near him floated up above the old man. And when the ice spike got near, the bubbles exploded. Pieces of ice flew in all directions, some of which plunged into the old man's body. The old man tried to get away, but ice spikes came down at him, one after another. How can it be? The old man shouted as he made the bubbles float up and destroy the ice spikes coming down at him. For any SSS-level ice awakened to unleash ice spikes that were at this size, it would have tired them out after one or two. But this young man was able to do so, and he showed no signs of being tired at all. The old man couldn't get his answer as finally his bubbles ran out and he couldn't conjure any more of them. Drip. Droplets of blood dripped onto the ground after an ice spike broke through the bubbles, and it stuck into the old man's body from head to his back. A familiar sound erupted in Lucas's mind. Ding! Slaughter points plus 400. Current slaughter points, 1000/7000. Host level, 4. Current abilities, 4. SSS level physique, SSS level shadow wielder, SSS level summoner, SSS level ice ability. Lucas felt a surge of energy coming into his body. Well done. Riley patted Lucas on his back and Riley glanced over at Haryanto. Pac-Man is in the underground bunker with a hidden route to the edge of the city, Haryanto said and pointed to a small hill beside the Pac family mansion. Pac-Man had used the men and the Pac family mansion as a decoy so that he could escape. Birum. Lucas glanced over from where the sound came from and saw another wave of trucks arriving.
Chapter 46. Pak soon ye.
A new wave of awakened teams had arrived to try and get the reward. They saw the carnage in front of their eyes with the bodies strewn around on the ground. It wasn't enough to deter them, and they rushed into the Pac family mansion without hesitation. Some stopped and wanted to find out what happened from Riley and why they were still out there at the entrance. Riley just shook his head and said, "We are tired after the tough battle earlier. Got to recuperate our energy before moving on." He pointed at the dead old man and the awakened teams nodded and moved on into the Pac family mansion. After all of the awakened teams entered the Pac family mansion, Riley brushed his long blue hair and said, "Everyone all right?" Lucas and the other team members nodded. "Grab a bite of your energy bar while we move," he said and waved for the team to move towards the hill beside the Pac family mansion. Lucas was now glad to be with the team. The team worked well with each other and was experienced enough to figure out where Pac-Man was, unlike the other awakened teams. These awakened teams would be going and facing even tougher challenges as they got deeper inside the Pac family mansion. Lucas and the other team members followed behind Haryanto trekking up the hill. The entrance to the underground bunker was on the other side of the hill. "You want one?" Haryanto offered Lucas an energy bar after he saw Lucas empty-handed. The other team members, especially Riley, glanced over with concern. Riley still remembered all the empty plates. "I have one myself," Lucas said and reached his hand into his dark matter vault armor. He took out an energy bar from the armor and started munching on the energy bar. Soon they descended on the other side of the hill, and at the entrance of the underground bunker, there were a team of 5 men guarding it. Lucas placed his hand on the ground and ice started to extend from the ground towards where the guards were standing. "Do you feel it's cold all of a sudden?" One of the men spoke, and the warm air coming from his mouth turned into white mist immediately. The others shivered and nodded their heads. "I need your lighter." One of the men wanted to light up a cigarette for some warmth, but he realized that he couldn't move his feet. Ice that was extending towards them had reached his feet and frozen them. The others tried to pull him away but couldn't, and the ice also extended beneath their feet and crept up their ankles and legs. Bladder. Icicles shot at them and plunged through their necks. Warm blood spurted out from their wounds and splattered onto the ground. They didn't have any chance against Lucas. A familiar sound erupted in Lucas's mind. Ding! Slaughter points plus 100. Current slaughter points, 1100/7000. Host level, 4. Current abilities, 4. Lucas came out from his cover and walked towards the entrance. He saw that the entrance was a thick steel door that had an electronic lock. "Let me," Haryanto said and placed his hand onto the electronic lock. His hand glowed as before, and the glow darted into the electronic lock. Whirl. After a few beeps, the lock was unlocked with a whirling sound. "After you." Haryanto pulled the door open and gestured for the others to enter. "Thanks." Emma walked past Haryanto and gave him a smile. Rex entered and gave him a wink, which Haryanto returned with his eyes rolling. Lucas and Riley entered next and Haryanto followed behind. Initially there was only a single path, and when they got deeper into the bunker, it started to look like a maze with its many paths. They stopped at a junction with 3 separate paths, and waited as Haryanto placed his hand on the wall with a CCTV on the top. After a few moments, Haryanto found the right path to where Pak Min-jae was. He pointed at the path in the middle and they entered the path in the middle. Rex spearheaded the team as his ability could protect the team with his rock wall. Behind him were Emma and Riley. Both with their poison and lightning ability would be able to deal out massive damage to the enemy. Lucas and Haryanto trailed behind. Without any electronics in the surroundings, Haryanto wasn't as powerful and needed Lucas's protection. When they reached an opening, machine guns mounted on both sides of the wall detected their intrusion and started shooting. Rex placed his hands on the ground, conjured a rock wall from it. Thud. The rock wall blocked the bullets, giving out a muted thud as the bullets chipped off bits of rocks from the wall. Riley, with his hands stretched out, palms facing the wall, unleashed a torrent of lightning. Sizzle. The lightning surged the electronics controlling the machine guns, and the machine guns lowered their barrels from their turrets. And the shooting stopped. Thanks for the gift. Haryanto walked over to one side of the wall and placed his hand onto the wiring. The machine guns came to life and they dismantled into pieces, after which the parts from the electronics and machine gun flew onto the armor of Haryanto. When it was done, Haryanto had 2 machine gun barrels on his arm. The belt of bullets was stored on his back. Lucas was impressed again with how the team operated. They were able to use their abilities to complement each other perfectly. "Who goes there?" A man's voice boomed in the opening. The man entered the opening from the other end with a team of men and women. Lucas glanced at the man and knew who the man was. The man looked like Pak Soon-hyun, but in his 30s. It was Pak Soon-hyun's father, Pak Soon-ji. Pak Soon-ji was staring intensely at Lucas with his bloodshot eyes. An old man's voice came from behind. "Pak Soon-ji. Get it over and done with. We don't have much time left to escape," Pak Min-jae said and left, with footsteps following behind.
Pak Soon-ji nodded.
It didn't matter if he escaped. Taking revenge for his son was much more important to him. The next moment, Pak Soon-ji's body turned metallic, just like Pak Yun's, and he lunged at Lucas. Chapter 47, The Chase. Bang! Haryanto fired at Pak Soon-ji with the machine guns on his arms. The bullets didn't do any damage as they skimmed off Pak Soon-ji's metallic body. Lucas made use of Haryanto's covering fire to conjure up an ice spike and hurl it towards Pak Soon-ji. The ice spike shot at Pak Soon-ji, but it only cracked into shards of ice that flew into the surroundings. When Pak Soon-ji landed on the ground, Lucas was ready for him. Ice crept up Pak Soon-ji's feet and froze his feet and ankles. Pak Soon-ji, with only revenge on his mind, ignored it and used both of his fists to smash down onto Lucas. To his surprise, his arms stopped in midair and couldn't move anymore. Lucas had used his shadow and stopped Pak Soon-ji's arms by holding onto his shadow. With his fist pulled back, Lucas was ready to deal a blow to Pak Soon-ji's face. But he saw that Pak Soon-ji was smirking at him. "Think I'm the same as my brother?" Pak Soon-ji said. Lucas stopped in his tracks. Suddenly, he felt pain all over his body. Sweat rolled down his forehead as he gritted his teeth and tried to endure the pain. The blood in his body was flowing in reverse. Haryanto, with his armored arms, swung at Pak Soon-ji. Clank. But he couldn't cause any damage to Pak Soon-ji's metallic body. Wham! Riley unleashed his lightning strike at Pak Soon-ji from the back. He, Rex, and Emma had finally killed off the other men who were with Pak Soon-ji. The lightning strike did its work and Pak Soon-ji's body twitched in pain, and Lucas felt his blood flow back to normal again. "Lucas, go with Haryanto to track Pak Min-jae. Let us deal with Pak Soon-ji." Lucas nodded and he ran with Haryanto towards the direction where Pak Min-jae went. As they ran in the tunnel, Lucas glanced over at Haryanto. He wanted to know what had happened just now. "Just now I felt my blood flow reversing. What ability was that?" After a moment of pondering, Haryanto said, "That person must have been at expert level for his SSS level metallic ability, which normally allows them to turn their body metallic and conjure up metals for attack. He must have gained the ability to control your blood flow from the minuscule amount of iron within. My guess is that, fortunately for us, he could only do it within a short distance. Lucas nodded and took note of what Haryanto had said. He thought about his own abilities and whether he would be able to gain new capabilities when he leveled up. He looked back at where they came from. Haryanto then said, "Don't worry. Riley's lightning ability and Emma's poison is a better match against that person. Rex's rock wall should be able to protect them." Lucas nodded and felt assured. They continued running and they reached a junction with two paths. Lucas and Haryanto stopped to decide which path to take. Looking down at the concrete ground, Lucas wasn't able to find any footsteps or markings that Pak Min-jae might have left. Haryanto looked around and tried to look for any surveillance electronics nearby. Nothing. They'd gotten far enough that there wasn't any surveillance electronics installed. Time was of the essence and they had to decide soon. Haryanto sighed and said, "I guess we will have to pick one of the paths each and go alone. Remember, don't risk your life. Do not engage when you encounter Pak Min-jae. We just need to track where Pak Min-jae went. Here, take this and mark your path with it." Haryanto took out small pieces of electronics and passed them to Lucas. Lucas took the electronics and placed them inside his dark matter vault armor. Then it was time to take a gamble. He chose the path on the left. They parted ways and Lucas ran as fast as he could. He took out a piece of the electronics periodically and dropped them on the ground. Finally, he caught up to Pak Min-jae. Pak Min-jae was waiting for his men to start the engine of an armored car parked in the open area. There was another exit on the other end that looked like the exit out of this underground bunker. Lucas knew he had to act fast. He assessed the situation and saw that Pak Min-jae had only 2 men left with him. They were dressed like all the other minions of the Pak family, unlike the old man and Pak Soon-ji. So Lucas figured they weren't much of a threat to him. Lucas then made his decision. He crept into the shadows that were cast near the entrance to the opening. After he took out his pistol, Lucas aimed for the head of Pak Min-jae. He took a deep breath and with his hands on the trigger, got ready to shoot at Pak Min-jae. Whip! Something whipped at his pistol and Lucas's hands moved a bit. It was enough to make him miss. Bang! His bullet whizzed past Pak Min-jae's shoulder. "Hurry up!"
Pak Min-jae shouted.
Something leaped at Lucas from above. Lucas rolled to the side and dodged the attack. It was a demonic beast that looked like a lizard, with its pink and spiky tongue sticking out. A man sat on the back of the lizard on a harness. Lucas figured the man to be someone with summoner ability. Whip! The lizard's tongue whipped at Lucas again. But this time Lucas was ready. He placed his hands on the ground and an ice wall rose from the ground. Out of the corner of his eyes, Lucas saw that Pak Min-jae was ready to get into the armored car. Crack! The lizard's tongue shot through the ice wall and came at Lucas. Its spikes on the tongue ripped through his dark matter vault armor but couldn't slice through his now toughened skin. Lucas used his shadow and held onto the shadow of the tongue. He yanked and tried to pull the tongue out of the lizard's mouth with his shadow. Purple gas emitted from the pores that were on the lizard's spiky tongue. Chapter 48. Summoner. Lucas quickly leaped away from the purple gas as he didn't know what it could do. Sizzle. The concrete ground melted when some of the purple gas touched it. The lizard turned its head, and the tongue whipped at where Lucas was standing again. Whip! It missed as Lucas had leaped away. He then held his palm towards where the lizard was and conjured an ice spike while he was running towards Pak Min-jae. The ice spike shot at the lizard, forcing it to jump. It crawled onto the wall and went up to the ceiling. Birum! Lucas heard the engine of the armored car start. He quickly summoned Sheba out of his summoner space. When Sheba appeared, Lucas communicated with it using his SSS-level summoner ability. Sheba, with a leap, lunged at the armored car. The lizard on top of the ceiling tried to stop Sheba and whipped its tongue from the ceiling at Sheba. Whip! Sheba stopped and turned towards the tongue coming at it. It grinned and opened its huge mouth. Snap! Sheba took a bite out of the tongue. The lizard dropped from the ceiling, crushing onto the man who was sitting on its back. It thrashed around, twitching from the pain, making it more painful for the man. Arg! The man gave out a loud cry. Sheba turned its focus back to the armored car and leaped onto it. Plop. Start driving. Pak-min-jae slapped the man in the driver's seat. The man quickly changed the gear and stepped on the pedal. The other man took out his automatic rifle and climbed out of the car window to try and shoot at Sheba. Before he could even lift his automatic rifle, he saw a huge mouth coming at him. And then darkness. Sheba spat out the head from its mouth. Plop. The man's body went limp, and it startled the driver. Screech. Losing his cool, the driver panicked. The car steered violently left and right. Sheba slid, and it plunged its claws into the roof of the armored car. It then opened its huge mouth and used its sharp fangs to take a bite out of the car's rooftop. Pak-min-jae looked up and his eyes opened wide at what he saw. How was it possible? This armored car was made with the toughest material he could afford. And this demonic beast just took a chunk out of it like it was ripping off paper. But he had no time to find out. He raised his hands, and blue flames came out of nowhere to engulf them. The interior of the armored car started to melt from the high temperature. The driver shook his head to clear his mind as he felt himself suffocating from the heat. Pak-min-jae focused as he only had one shot at killing this demonic beast. The flames burst out and shot at Sheba. But Sheba just opened its wide mouth and swallowed the flames as if it was dessert. No, it can't be. What are you? Why don't you just die? Pak-min-jae exerted more energy into his flames and the flames roared and gave out another burst at Sheba. It made no difference as Sheba soaked in the flames like it was a sauna. Slowly, the flames withered out. Pak-min-jae held his hand on his chest, trying to catch his breath. Sheba tilted its head and looked at Pak-min-jae from above. Burp. It gave out a burp and leaped down into the armored car through the opening from the roof. The driver tried to do a hard turn to put Sheba off its balance. But the armored car skidded and overturned instead. Crash. The armored car tumbled and finally crashed into the wall of the tunnel. Smoke filled the inside of the car within seconds. Pak-min-jae waved his hands and tried to clear the smoke away from him. When he cleared the smoke, all he saw was Sheba grinning at him. Sheba took a bite at Pak-min-jae's head and spat it out afterwards. Meanwhile, Lucas placed his hands onto the ground, and ice extended towards the lizard not far away from him. Purple gas emitted from the lizard's flailing tongue as a last resort. But it could only burn and melt the surface of the ice. The ice just kept getting thicker as it encroached nearer towards the lizard. Arg! The man who was stuck underneath the lizard cried out in pain. His body froze from the ice. The ice quickly engulfed the man and the lizard, making them look like some sort of ice sculpture. Lucas pulled back his fist and punched at the frozen lizard and man. The impact from his punch caused the frozen lizard and man to break into pieces. A familiar sound erupted in his mind. Ding! Slaughter points plus 400. Current slaughter points, 1500/7000. Host level, 4. Current abilities, 4. A surge of energy came into his body. Lucas quickly walked over to see how Sheba was doing. The armored car didn't travel very far and Lucas arrived at where it crashed after a minute of running. Sheba, with one of its claws, was rolling something on the ground as it waited for Lucas. Lucas frowned when he saw that Sheba was playing with the head of Pak-min-jae. Careful, that's $1 million right there, Lucas said. Sheba looked up and saw Lucas. It jumped with joy and skipped towards him. Lucas then squatted down and patted it on its head. Well done, buddy. He took out an energy bar and gave it to Sheba. Sheba swallowed it in an instant and it jumped happily at Lucas for more. Lucas reached into his armor for more energy bars but stopped when he heard footsteps approaching from behind. He quickly summoned Sheba back into his summoner space. I see you've done all the work for us. It was Riley and the other team members. However, Riley didn't look too pleased at Lucas. He brushed his long blue hair and said, I've instructed you to... Boom! Before Riley could finish, explosions could be heard coming from outside the exit. Chapter 49, Beast Horde Attack. When they got out of the exit, they saw that they were now some distance away from the Pak family mansion. Lucas turned back and could barely see the small hill that they came from. In front of them were rows of suburban houses, and the residents of these houses were getting into their vehicles. Some were already driving towards the city center. One of the cars slowed down and wound down the window. The driver shouted at Lucas and the others, "What are you waiting for? Get to the city's underground shelter. The beast horde is coming. Honey, stop wasting time and get going." The wife of the driver, sitting in the seat beside him, said impatiently. The driver sighed and glanced at the back, where his 3 kids were sitting nervously, with the eldest among them hugging his younger sisters to console them. Lucas's phone buzzed, and so did the others. They picked up their phones and saw that there was a notification. It was a message from the governor's office. Redcon Red activated. Beast horde attack imminent. All awakened activated for the defense of the Southern Battle Administration area. Report to your team's designated duties. All other awakened are to report to the underground shelter. Lucas glanced over at Riley. There must be something going on, he thought to himself. The sudden turn of events couldn't have been a coincidence. Lucas was also worried about the beast horde. Whatever he had known about the beast horde attack was from Bundy. And from Bundy's experience, it would be something catastrophic if the beast horde overran the city wall. He didn't care much about people like Jules Robertson, but kind folks like Bundy were still dear to him. Riley frowned at the sudden turn of events. He too figured something fishy was going on. But it wasn't the time to get to the bottom of it. Lucas, our team is tasked to defend the city at the wall. You can join us if you want to, or you can head out to the underground shelter. Riley brushed his long blue hair and said. He glanced at the other team members, and they nodded their heads at his decision. They weren't about to let someone so young and with potential go and face imminent death. Lucas shook his head and pointed at the insignia on his left shoulder. We are a team, remember? He wasn't someone to desert his team in need. And besides that, it might be a good place for him to gain more slaughter points. Hiding around in the underground shelter might only just delay his eventual demise if the demonic beasts overran the wall. Riley patted Lucas on his back and said, Don't worry, we will get through this. He glanced at the other team members and said, Contact your loved ones while I figure out a way to get to the wall. Lucas sent a message to Bundy, asking him to be safe, and he thought about the armored car inside Pac Min J's underground bunker. Harrianto, you think you can fix the armored car back there? Good idea. I can give it a try. Harrianto nodded, and both of them ran back towards the armored car. Rex started to message all his girlfriends, telling them to be safe and how he missed them. Emma and Riley rolled their eyes, and they made a call to their families. All of them had something precious to protect. Don't you have family to call? Harrianto asked. I'm the only one in my family. Lucas replied, and he glanced at Harrianto. What about you? Harrianto shrugged his shoulders and said, Same. My parents died during the last beast horde attack. When they arrived at the armored car, Lucas got to work immediately. He lifted the armored car and flipped it back upright. Harrianto pulled out the body from the driver's seat and tried to start the engine. Virum. Miraculously, it started, and Harrianto waved for Lucas to hop in. The armored car chugged along, leaving a trail of black smoke behind. Rodney was standing on top of the 90-foot-tall wall, which stretched outward, encircling the city within its protection. He drew a deep breath from his cigar. At this height, the strong wind blew against him, making his cigar burn brighter. His cigar trembled as his hands shook from what he was witnessing in front of him. And at the top of the wall with him were soldiers manning their position with cannons, rapid-fire machine guns, and explosives. There were thousands of demonic beasts trying to get through the wall. And behind them, he could see the dust that was being kicked up by the demonic beasts that hadn't arrived yet. The number of demonic beasts was more than twice as much as the previous beast hordes. How do we survive this? He thought. Boom! The cannons on the walls fired at the horde of fire deer running closest towards the wall. The cannon shot hit, and it blew them into pieces. The soldiers cheered, and they started firing their rapid-firing machine guns at the ice wolves coming at them. Buzz! A line of amber swept across the ice wolves. As the bullets hit the ice wolves, they were ripped apart and a mist of blood covered the area. "Ready, fire!" The commander of the cannon platoon shouted his orders, and the cannons volleyed another shot at the demonic beasts. The soldiers' morale got higher as the cannon shots hit again. They cheered and began firing with whatever they had. Using their rifles and bazookas, they unleashed all the firepower they had at the demonic beasts. However, the cheers were short-lived. Before the cannons charged up, flocks of huge eagles that had red feathers flew out from the woods and swooped at the cannons. They opened their beaks and shot out fireballs at the cannons. Boom! Huge explosions erupted, sending debris from the cannon flying all over. Some of the giant fire eagles swooped down at the soldiers who were reloading their weapons. "Arg! Help me!" One of the soldiers cried out for help as he was carried up into the air in the giant fire eagle's claws. Bullets whizzed by as the other soldiers on the ground shot at the giant fire eagle. The soldier held by the claws felt the wind blowing at him and saw the ground coming at him as he fell towards the ground. Splatter! When the soldier hit the ground, he splattered into a mangled mess. One after another, the other soldiers caught by the giant fire eagle were dropped onto the ground. Rodney, with his cigar in his mouth, conjured 2 steel spears in his hands and hurled them at one of the giant fire eagles. Chapter 50, Shadow Lotus. The giant fire eagle changed its direction and tried to dodge the spears coming towards it. Whoosh! One of the spears flew past it. But the other spear miraculously changed direction and shot through the giant fire eagle's body. Rodney, who was at expert mastery level for his SS-level metallic ability, could change the direction of his steel spears at will. Droplets of blood dripped down like rain. The giant fire eagle plunged downwards and slammed into the ground. Rodney quickly conjured up 2 more steel spears. To his horror, he had drawn the attention of the giant fire eagles. 5 of them came swooping down at him. A man wearing a captain's uniform came and raised his hands at the giant fire eagles. 5 ice spikes appeared in front of his hands, and the ice spikes shot at the giant fire eagles swooping down. They opened their beaks, and a burst of flames blew at the ice spikes. The ice spikes melted before they could reach the giant fire eagles. Having only a level ice ability, the captain's ice spikes couldn't withstand the flames of these middle-tiered demonic beasts. The distraction was enough for the captain to get Rodney out of harm's way. They had leaped away from where the giant fire eagles hit with their sharp beaks and claws. But everything wasn't going too well. There were screams of pain everywhere. The other demonic beasts had gotten near enough to hit the soldiers back with their projectiles of different elements. Wham! Lightning strikes shot at the giant fire eagles out of nowhere. The lightning strikes fried the giant fire eagles, and they dropped out from the sky. "Stay close to the team," Riley shouted at Lucas. They had arrived moments ago and were horrified to see what was happening. Soldiers were being slaughtered by the giant fire eagles on the top of the wall. So, they hurriedly climbed up the path to get to the top of the wall. Some of the remaining giant fire eagles, once again, turned their focus to whoever harmed them. But this time, before they could come near, they stopped midair, and suddenly it was as if someone had yanked them out of the sky. Smash! They smashed hard onto the ground. Lucas had used his shadow to grab onto the shadow of the giant fire eagles and pulled them onto the ground. He went in for the kill next with his ice spikes. The ice spikes shot at the giant fire eagle's head. They opened their beaks and spewed out flames at the ice spikes. Splatter! Their flames couldn't melt away Lucas's ice spike. Flesh and white matter splattered all around when the ice spikes nailed into their heads. A familiar sound erupted in Lucas's mind. Ding! Slaughter points plus 1,200. Current slaughter points 2,700/7,000. Host level 4. Current abilities 4. Riley continued to blast his lightning at the remaining eagles. Meanwhile, Emma blew her red poison up towards the air. The poison, although barely reached the giant fire eagles, it was still able to burn the lungs of them and cause them to plunge down into the ground. Hurling sharp rocks at the giant eagles, Rex was also able to hit some of them. Haryanto went over to the cannons, and he placed his hand on one of them that didn't have much damage. The cannon broke up into pieces and they flew onto Haryanto. When they were done, Haryanto had a small cannon on both of his arms. Boom! He shot at the giant fire eagles that were swooping down at him. They burst into a red mist after being hit by the cannon shot. "Riley, you are finally here," Rodney called out to him. Riley nodded at Rodney and asked, "Director, what's the situation so far?" "Not going too well. We lost the cannon platoon. And the demonic beasts are still coming our way," he said and looked warily at what was happening. The demonic beasts were still coming at the wall. Soldiers were running out of ammo, and their energy was slowly being drained from using their abilities. "You and your team hold the fort here. I have to check with the governor whether backup has been called." Rodney took out his phone and called the governor. Lucas and the other team members got to work. They hurled whatever they had at the demonic beasts coming at the wall. Governor's residence. The governor opened a briefcase, and inside it was a red device with a button on it. He hovered his finger over the button and hesitated. After a moment later, he pulled back his finger and closed the briefcase. Ring. His phone rang and he picked it up when he saw that it was from Rodney. "You called the Central Administration for backup already? Please tell me so. We might not hold any longer." Rodney's voice spoke with cries of pain in the background. "I've called and the nearest help we can get is on his way. Captain Thorne Blackmore and his company are on their way. ETA 1 hour. The governor replied. "Thorne Blackmore? Then we might have a chance," Rodney said and ended the call. The governor placed his phone on the desk and poured a cup of water to calm himself down. He picked up the cup and froze his hand in the air when he heard some commotion outside of his office. Putting down his cup quietly, he pulled out his drawer and took out the pistol inside it. He tiptoed towards the door with his pistol gripped tightly in his hands. Bam! The door was blown open and splinters struck into the governor's body. A man dressed in dark armor, with a lotus emblem on the left chest, walked into the room. "Who are you?" The governor aimed his pistol at the man. Blood traveled along his arms from his wound and dripped onto the floor. The man shook his head and said, "You wouldn't know me. Besides, you shall not breathe any longer." Bladder. The man lunged at the governor with incredible speed and ripped out the governor's throat. With a thud, the governor fell backwards onto the ground. The man squatted down, took out a knife and sliced the governor's right hand off. He kept it in a container and walked over to the briefcase. Now the show can begin. Chapter 51, Middle-Tiered Demonic Beasts. Lucas looked down from the edge of the wall and saw the hundreds of fire deer trying to leap and climb up the wall. Fortunately, the height of the wall was insurmountable for them. He didn't hesitate and hurled his ice spikes at them. The fire deer retaliated. Numerous fireballs were shot at the ice spikes but didn't do much to the ice spikes. Bladder. The ice spikes plunged into the fire deer and ripped them apart. Limbs, heads, and innards of the fire deer were strewn into the air. Ding! Slaughter points plus 1,000. Current slaughter points 3,700/7,000. Host level 4. Current abilities 4. Lucas regained his energy with the notification appearing in his mind. However, he didn't have any time for a breather. More fire deer rushed towards the wall. His teammates weren't doing as well as they had. Their energy had depleted, and their abilities had significantly weakened. Riley's lightning strike was now half of what it was. Flickers of lightning shooting at the demonic beasts. With his rocks, Rex now used them only when necessary to cover Riley. It was the same with Emma and Haryanto. "Oh no! Someone help!" Soldiers shouted from the left, where Lucas was standing. The bodies of the demonic beasts had piled up so high that some of the fire deer could leap onto the top of the wall. 3 fire deer charged at the soldiers at short range, and many of the soldiers caught were burned by the antlers that were burning in flames. More demonic beasts leaped up onto the wall. Ice wolves, using their ice ability, created protruding ice surfaces on the surface of the wall for them to leap onto. Icicles shot at soldiers running in to reinforce and help get the wounded out of the way. The ice wolves then had a feast with those soldiers. Lucas knew he had to do something quick. He placed his hands onto the ground, and the ice extended towards the 3 fire deer. The ice caught the feet of the fire deer running, and the momentum of their charge didn't stop. Their feet, which were frozen instantly, broke off and they fell forward onto the ground. His ice spikes were waiting, and they shot at the fire deer from the air. Ding! Slaughter points plus 600. Current slaughter points 4,300/7,000. Host level 4. Current abilities 4. Lucas felt that familiar surge of energy coming back into his body. His teammates were in awe of him by now. How was it possible for him to be so energetic? They were at their wits' end and had to quickly rest to replenish their energy. But Lucas just didn't seem to be so tired. Buzz. One of the soldiers turned the turret with the rapid-firing machine gun mounted on top and fired at the ice wolves. A trail of amber swept across, and the ice wolves burst into a pulp of red mist. Heck, Riley, I won't let you steal the limelight this time. A man with a headband and mustache appeared from the stairs and said, "Time for you to let me be the hero." Behind him, more and more awakened appeared. These awakened teams that were activated had finally arrived. "It's all yours." Riley nodded at the man with headband and mustache, and he retreated from the edge of the wall. So did Lucas and the other team members. The awakened teams took over and cleared those demonic beasts that had breached onto the wall. Lucas handed out some of his energy bars to the other team members. They took them and quickly munched on them. Slowly, the situation felt to be in control again. Riley and the other team members were able to regain some of their energy. Ammunition was replenished and the soldiers finally had the capacity to take the injured to the casualty point. "Don't lose focus. It's not over yet." The captain shouted his orders at the soldiers. Rodney, who was standing beside the captain, smoked his cigar to try and calm himself down. Tremble. And the captain was right as the earth trembled. Another wave of the demonic beasts was coming. The captain took up his binoculars and his jaw dropped. He swallowed a mouthful of saliva and turned to Rodney. Rodney frowned when he saw the captain's dire expression. "Tell me," Rodney asked. "Middle-tiered demonic beasts. All of them." Rodney snatched the binoculars from the captain's hand and looked. Cold sweat trickled down his back. Underground shelter. Like the other citizens, Bundy was with his young daughter, trying to find a place to sit down. His daughter's legs were shaky as she walked, suffering from an illness since young. But the underground shelter was already packed. Families and some men and women arrived with their belongings, taking up the space. Bundy decided to carry his daughter in his arms while he tried to find a place. "It's all right, Cynthia. The soldiers and awakened will protect us," Bundy said softly to his daughter. Cynthia looked up at Bundy and gave him a smile. "Daddy will protect me too," she said. "Yes, I will." Bundy walked and tried to find a place to settle. "Here. Over here." A voice cried out to him. Bundy glanced over and saw a young woman waving at him. He walked over and the young woman said, "Here, let her sit. I have other things to do." The young woman, Patricia, stood up and ushered Bundy to let his daughter sit on the vacated area. "Thanks. But where are you going?" Bundy asked. "As an awakened. The city needs people like me," Patricia said. Students like her with awakened powers were tasked to protect the underground shelter. Her parents, who were soldiers, were safe as they were stationed at the underground base in the north of the city. And she wasn't going to let them down. Hordes of ember elephants came rushing towards the wall. The dust and particles on the ground flew up into the air as the earth trembled with every step they took. Water gorillas ran by the side of the ember elephants. Lucas and the other team members watched intensely at the horde and got ready. Chapter 52. Food. Fire at will. The captain shouted when the ember elephants got into effective shooting range. Buzz. The rapid-firing machine guns and cannons that were still operable sprayed their projectiles at the ember elephants. When the bullets hit the ember elephants, they could only rip through the body and limbs of the ember elephants. Some of the injured Ember elephants were still able to trudge along towards the wall. The cannons did more damage as they took out some of the Ember elephants. However, it wasn't enough to stop the hundreds of Ember elephants. When they got to the wall, they charged at the thick metallic doors of the checkpoints. Thud! The soldiers behind could feel the doors vibrate each time the Ember elephants banged at the doors. When they saw cracks appear on the wall, they held onto their weapons, getting ready for what was to come. Meanwhile, the water gorillas scaled up the pile of bodies of the lower-tiered demonic beasts. They tried to climb up onto the top of the wall. Lucas with his ice spikes waited and hurled the ice spikes at them. Splash! The water gorillas formed a wall of water engulfing their bodies to protect them from the ice spikes. The ice spikes caused the wall of water to splash out, and they could only plunge halfway through the bodies of the water gorillas. They twitched from the pain and roared angrily at Lucas. Lucas conjured up another volley of ice spikes and shot them at the water gorillas again. Splash! This time, even though the wall of water decreased the momentum of the ice spikes, the water gorillas that were hit fell back and tumbled down the pile of demonic beast bodies. Lucas had aimed for their heads, and it worked. The ice spikes penetrated deep enough into their brains to kill them off. A familiar sound erupted in Lucas's mind. Ding! Slaughter points plus 1,600. Current slaughter points 5,900/7,000. Host level 4. Current abilities 4. Lucas didn't have time to look at the information panel in his mind as the water gorillas retaliated. They flung balls of water up into the air, and the balls of water flew above the top of the wall, where Lucas was standing. Take cover! Lucas shouted, and he placed his hands on the ground, conjured up an ice wall covering the other team members. The balls of water exploded, and the water droplets shot out in every direction. Thud! The water droplets hit onto the ice wall and penetrated halfway through it. Shards of the ice wall flew off. The soldiers in the surroundings weren't as lucky as the water droplets shot through their bodies. The helmets and armor they had on them weren't strong enough to withstand the water droplets. Screams and whimpers could be heard as the soldiers lay on the ground with blood slowly pooling beneath their bodies. Before Lucas could shatter the wall of ice and retaliate, another wave of the water balls came shooting up into the air again. Thud! This time the water droplets did their job and the ice wall cracked, and some of the water droplets shot at Lucas and the other team members. Lucas's dark matter vault armor hardened, trying to protect him from the water droplets. It was not enough. The water droplets broke through the armor but couldn't break through Lucas's skin. All they could do was make his skin redden from the impact. Lucas quickly glanced over at his teammates to check on them. They were huddled together in a pile. Rex had covered Emma, Riley, and Harrianto with his body made of rock from the water droplets. He got up and gave a thumbs up to Lucas. "Watch out! They're coming!" Lucas shouted as he saw a water gorilla leap onto the edge of the wall where Rex was standing. He quickly ducked his head as he felt a gust of wind coming from the edge of the wall. A water gorilla, who had leaped onto the top of the wall, swung its huge, strong arm at Lucas. Whoosh! The arm of the water gorilla brushed Lucas's hair as it nearly missed. Lucas kicked at the ground and lunged at the water gorilla. The water gorilla reacted, and it tried to smash its arms down at Lucas's head. Halfway through, its hands froze in the air. Lucas had used his shadow to grab onto the shadow of the water gorilla's arms. He conjured a small ice spike and plunged it through the chin of the water gorilla. A familiar sound erupted in his mind. Ding! Slaughter points plus 400. Current slaughter points 6,300/7,000. Host level 4. Current abilities 4. Lucas glanced over and saw that Riley and the others were done with the water gorillas attacking them. However, all around him there was only chaos. The soldiers were running around everywhere in panic. In a distance away from Lucas, one of the soldiers was held into the air by a water gorilla. The water gorilla with its strong arms pulled, and it ripped the body of the soldier into halves. Blood and the innards of the soldier splashed onto the ground. The visual impact stunned the other soldiers for a moment. Lucas unleashed ice spikes at the numerous water gorillas that kept coming. However, the wall of water that protected their bodies made them hard to deal with. Soon he was separated from Riley and the rest of the team. The others were forced away by the water gorillas. "Riley, I can handle them myself," Lucas shouted, as he still had a trump card up his sleeve. Riley and the other members were anxious and tried to reach Lucas, but the waves of water gorillas coming at them made it impossible. "Fire! Do what you were trained to do." The captain shouted his orders at the soldiers. This knocked some of the soldiers back into reality, and they got onto the turrets and started firing at the water gorillas. Thud! 2 water gorillas came at Lucas from his sides. Their arms smashed down at Lucas, but he blocked them with his arms. The water gorillas tried to push down their arms onto Lucas, but they were surprised to find out that they couldn't. Lucas's strength was much stronger than theirs. They wanted to pull back their arms, but something appeared out of an orange glow. Sheba's eyes opened wide, and it grinned when it saw the 2 water gorillas. Chapter 53. Skeletal Tiger. Sheba lunged at one of the water gorillas. The water gorilla opened its mouth, and a waterspout shot at Sheba. Splash. Sheba wasn't bothered by the waterspout as it couldn't slice through its scaly skin. It then in turn opened its mouth and with its sharp fangs snapped at the water gorilla's head. Bladder. Sheba took out a huge chunk of the water gorilla's head. It landed on the water gorilla's shoulder, got to the other shoulder through the water gorilla's back, which allowed Sheba to turn and face the other water gorilla. The other water gorilla took a deep breath and opened its mouth to unleash a waterspout at Sheba. Sheba leaped back to the other side again and dodged the waterspout. Slice. The waterspout sliced diagonally from the shoulder to the waist of the water gorilla. Sheba lunged at the water gorilla on the opposite side. Snap. Took out a huge chunk of the water gorilla's head. The arms of the 2 water gorillas went limp, and they dropped to the ground. Burp. Sheba gave out a burp and glanced up at Lucas. However, Lucas didn't have time to pat Sheba's head. More water gorillas came at him. One lunged at him from the air and another shot out a waterspout towards Lucas. The waterspout sliced the ground, leaving a trail of broken concrete in its wake. Soon it got near to Lucas. Lucas placed his hands on the ground and an ice wall appeared in front of him. Crack. The waterspout sliced chunks of ice out of the ice wall but couldn't break it. As the water gorilla coming at Lucas descended with its arms smashing down, aiming at Lucas's head, its shadow became bigger. Lucas used his shadow and yanked the water gorilla to the side. Thud. The water gorilla fell onto the ground on its side, making the pieces of broken concrete jump up into the air. An ice spike came down from the air and plunged into the water gorilla's head. A familiar sound erupted in Lucas's mind. Ding! Slaughter points plus 400. Current slaughter points 6,700/7,000. Host level 4. Current abilities 4. Lucas immediately felt his energy coming back into his body. Now, the water gorillas that came for him were all taken care of. He glanced over at Riley and the other team members. Lucas sighed with relief when he saw they were still alive. Tremble. The earth shook again. But this time it was different. Lucas could see the trees in the woods falling as a huge figure half the height of the trees approached. It was a huge demonic beast that looked like a tiger with bones that spiked out of its body. The beast made the trees fall sideways as it approached. Lucas frowned as he had never seen anything like it before. The soldiers and the awakened teams gasped in horror at what they saw. The demonic beasts went into a frenzy instead. Bang! The ember elephants charged at the huge metallic door of the checkpoint, one after another. It wouldn't take long for the huge metallic door to be breached. Water gorillas came at the soldiers and awakened teams with their bloodshot eyes. The appearance of the skeletal tiger had somehow affected the demonic beasts. Rodney's cigar dropped to the ground. He gasped with his mouth wide open in horror. Damn it! Where the hell is Thorn Blackmore? We can't deal with a demonic beast that's high-tiered level with what we have now. He cursed and shouted. The captain who was injured held his hand onto his left shoulder, trying to stop the bleeding. He glanced around and assessed the situation. His men had sustained more than 40% casualties. The awakened teams didn't fare any better. More than half that came to reinforce the defense were injured or dead. Not everyone was as lucky as Riley's team. Cannons fire at the incoming target. Rapid-firing machine guns fire at will. The captain shouted, not wanting to give up. Soldiers tried to get to the stations and turrets. The water guerrillas wouldn't let them. Arg! Screams of pain could be heard as the waterspouts sliced the soldiers into halves. Lucas gave free rein to Sheba and it went on its way. A soldier who was on the ground held up his arm to try and stop the water gorilla's fist smashing down at him. He narrowed his eyes, not wanting to witness the eventuality. A dark figure went by, leaving a shimmer of itself. Plop! The water gorilla's head had been bitten off and its body fell backwards onto the ground. Sheba went on and picked off the water gorillas, killing the soldiers. The soldiers, with its help, finally got to the cannons and turrets of the rapid-firing machine guns. Boom! The cannons roared and shot at the skeletal tiger. Shots landed onto the ground and a huge explosion erupted. The skeletal tiger had leaped away, and the earth trembled again. Buzz! Trails of ember swept at the skeletal tiger. It leaped diagonally forward to the right, and the trails of ember followed. The rapid-firing machine guns couldn't keep up, and it did a sudden turn to the left. It lowered its limbs, and with a leap forward, the skeletal tiger landed onto the top of the wall. Tremble! Everyone had to try and steady themselves from the trembling. Boom! With its huge claw it swept at the cannons that were in front of it. The cannons exploded, and with the hit, soldiers were hurled into the air like toys. Splatter! Some of the soldiers fell out of the wall and splattered onto the ground. It turned its focus on the rapid-firing machine guns next. With its paw, the skeletal tiger smashed it down onto the ground. Sharp bones thrust out from the ground, and they extended in a line, destroying all the turrets along the way. Everyone, focus all our attacks on this demonic beast, Riley shouted, and everyone did so. He raised his hands and they glowed with flickering lightning. Lucas conjured up an ice spike as big as he could. The ice spike slowly grew bigger. From an adult size, it grew to be 4 times as big. Now! Riley shouted and gave the command. Chapter 54. Thorn Blackmore. Everyone hurled whatever they had at the skeletal tiger. Wham! Riley's lightning strike was too fast for the skeletal tiger to dodge. It hit the skeletal tiger's body, but the spiky bones on the body took the hit. Only a small piece of the bones was chipped off. Roar! The skeletal tiger gave out a huge roar and stomped its paw onto the ground. This time, huge bone spikes rose from the ground. They surrounded the skeletal tiger like a wall. Everyone's projectiles and abilities hit onto the skeletal wall. Boom! It caused a huge explosion as the fireballs, icicles, steel spears, and rocks hit onto the skeletal wall. Smoke filled the air, and everyone waved at the smoke coming into their eyes. When the smoke cleared, the skeletal wall was still intact. Whoosh! The skeletal tiger jumped out of the skeletal wall and landed on a group of soldiers. Lucas waited for this moment, and he unleashed his ice spike, which was now half the size of the skeletal tiger. Whoosh! The ice spike shot at its head. The skeletal tiger swept its paw at the ice spike, but the momentum and size of the ice spike made it difficult. Crack! His paw could only crack bits of the ice from the ice spike. The next moment, the ice spike crashed into the head of the skeletal tiger, making it take a few steps back. Drip! Blood dripped onto the ground. The ice spike had caused damage. Riley quickly followed up and unleashed another lightning strike at the skeletal tiger's head. Sizzle! The lightning strike fried the fur of the skeletal tiger. Shaking its head, the skeletal tiger tried to shake itself out of the lightning shock. Things started to look bright. Everyone had hopes, and they glanced over at Lucas and Riley to see if they had another strike ready. Their hearts sank initially when they saw that Riley was now exhausted. They glanced over to Lucas next, and to their surprise, in a good way, they saw that Lucas didn't look tired. He was conjuring up another ice spike. This time, it was only half the size of the earlier ice spike. Lucas didn't waste time and shot the ice spike at the skeletal tiger's head again. Still in shock from the lightning strike, it tried to dodge but was groggy, and its movement was unsteady. Thud! The ice spike crashed into the skeletal tiger's head. And as the ice spike cracked from the impact, the sharp edges of the ice shards cut into the flesh. Soon, the skeletal tiger's head was a mangled mass of blood and exposed flesh. The soldiers and awakened teams followed suit. They attacked at the same spot as Lucas with their abilities. Boom! A huge explosion occurred, and loud cracking sound of the bones fracturing could be heard. The skeletal tiger staggered as it tried to get away. It moved towards the direction of the city. Stop it! Don't let it get into the city. Lucas lunged at it, but it swept at Lucas with its tail with spikes. A wall of ice appeared in front of him and blocked the tail. The tail's spikes brushed across the wall of ice and chipped some pieces of it off. Lucas then used his shadow and grabbed onto the shadow of the tail. He pulled back and tried to stop the skeletal tiger with his strength. When the skeletal tiger felt someone holding onto it, it tried to leap away. Lucas's shadow leaned forward from the force, but he quickly regained his posture and pulled back. They were in a tussle with no clear winners. By the side, the soldiers and awakened teams tried to help, but a new wave of demonic beasts had arrived and gotten onto the top of the wall. Boom! Battles ensued as the soldiers and awakened teams turned their attention to the new wave of demonic beasts. Suddenly, Lucas saw dark shadows loomed over him. He looked up and saw many dark spots high up in the sky. The dark spots became bigger and bigger, and finally Lucas was able to identify what they were. From their silhouette, Lucas saw that they were warplanes. One of the warplanes swooped down towards Lucas. A man jumped out of the warplane and descended at the skeletal tiger. Crack! The man, whose body was in metallic form, landed onto the back of the skeletal tiger with a kick. Spiky bones cracked and broke off from the skeletal tiger's body. His kick also crushed the backbone of the skeletal tiger. Thorn Blackmore, what took you so long? Rodney shouted at the man. The man, Captain Thorn Blackmore, had finally come as reinforcements sent by the Central Administration. Thorn Blackmore still had work to do, and he plunged his metallic hand into the back of the skeletal tiger. The wound of the skeletal tiger slowly turned metallic, and the metallic portion slowly spread out. It spread to the limbs, and soon, the limbs of the skeletal tiger couldn't move anymore. When the whole body of the skeletal tiger became metallic, it stopped moving like a steel statue. Thorn Blackmore then proceeded to deal with the other demonic beasts. Warplanes swooped down and fired at the Ember Elephants and other demonic beasts trying to knock down the huge metallic doors. Rockets fired from the warplanes and many of the demonic beasts were blown into pieces. A huge arm of a water gorilla swung at Lucas, and he punched at the arm. Splatter! Flesh burst out from the arm and splattered onto the ground. Lucas turned towards the water gorilla and gave it an uppercut on its chin. Thud! The uppercut connected and the jaw of the water gorilla exploded. He gave a left hook at the water gorilla. Splatter! Flesh and gray matter burst out of the water gorilla's head from the other side of the head where his fist landed. A familiar sound erupted in Lucas's mind. Ding! Slaughter points plus 400. Current slaughter points 7,100/7,000. Congratulations on leveling up. Host level 5. Current abilities 4. New features unlocked. Chapter 55. Storms coming. Lucas was glad when he saw the words "new features unlocked" in his mind. He continued to read the remaining information. Host can upgrade the abilities with slaughter points. Please select new ability. 1. SSS level lightning. 2. SS level metallic. 3. S level crimson pact. 4. A level sound. The choice was relatively simple for him. After witnessing Riley's lightning ability and the damage it does, Lucas thought about selecting the SSS level lightning ability. Information about the ability appeared next. SSS level lightning allows host to use lightning strike to attack enemies. Each lightning strike needs time to charge up. Host's energy will be drained with each lightning strike. Add this as new ability?
Y barra diagonal N.
Lucas thought yes silently to himself. The next moment, he felt his muscles twitching, as if coming to life and energy came into his body, filling him up with vitality and strength. He gritted his teeth as the energy coursed through his body. When it was all over, he felt that he was twice as strong as he was. Knowledge on the usage of SSS-level lightning ability also came into his mind. He summoned the system's information panel in his mind again. Ding! Current slaughter points, 100/20,000. Host level, 5. Current abilities, 5. SSS level physique, novice, 0/3000. SSS level shadow wielder, novice, 0/3000. SSS level summoner, novice, 0/3000. SSS level ice ability, novice, 0/3000. SSS level lightning ability, novice, 0/3000. He saw that there was now information on how many slaughter points he needed to upgrade all of his abilities. Lucas frowned when he saw the number of slaughter points he needed to upgrade all of his abilities. Boom! The warplanes continued their bombing. When they cleared the Ember Elephants trying to charge into the city through the checkpoint entrance, the warplanes hovered over the top of the wall. Slowly descending, the back of the warplanes opened, and troops jumped out of it, landing on the top of the wall. These troops with Thorn Blackmore joined in the battle with the demonic beasts. A water gorilla came at Lucas with its huge arms smashing down at him. Lucas didn't hesitate and gave it a punch. Splash! Water engulfed the water gorilla. But it was not enough. Lucas's punch plunged through the wall of water, causing the water to splash around. His punch didn't slow down one bit and hit the water gorilla's arms. Splatter! Chunks of flesh and bones splattered from the impact. Lucas pulled back his fist and punched at the water gorilla's head again. This time, the water gorilla's head splattered into a red mist. A familiar sound erupted in his mind. Ding! Slaughter points plus 400. Current slaughter points, 500/20,000. Host level, 5. Current abilities, 5. Soon, the situation started to become under control. The troops that joined in wore different uniforms and gear from the other soldiers and were all at least SS or SSS level awakened. Thorn Blackmore, who was burly and had an eye patch on his left eye, killed off the demonic beasts easily. Lucas figured he might be at least expert level. When there was no demonic beast coming at him, Lucas squatted down and patted Sheba on its head. Thanks, buddy. I will introduce you to the team when things are settled. Sheba got excited and jumped around. But it was time for it to go back to his summoner space. An orange glow appeared and Sheba disappeared out of sight. After going through life and death situations fighting the hordes of demonic beasts, Lucas felt comfortable with letting Riley and the rest of the team know about its presence. And if he was lucky, Riley and the other team members might know a thing or two about Sheba's origin. Everyone reorganize. Get the injured to the casualty point quickly. The captain shouted as a healer was healing his shoulder by the side. Soldiers then got to work, following the orders. The demonic beasts at the top of the wall had finally been cleared. Rodney panted as he tried to catch his breath. Why did this happen? Thorn Blackmore went over to Rodney and said. Even though they were both captain ranked, Thorn Blackmore gave out an aura that was much more authoritative than the commander of the wall. Rodney then briefed him on what had happened. Thorn Blackmore frowned and looked at the surroundings after being briefed. There were many doubts going through his head. How did Pak Min-jae know when there was going to be a beast horde attack? And what was he after? Having the city destroyed? Questions went through Thorn Blackmore's mind. He glanced out into the distance and the skies started to darken. A storm was coming. Lucas, are you all right? Haryanto, who now looked tired, came over and asked. His armor made from the cannon's parts was now mostly damaged. Lucas nodded his head. Riley and the others also came over. They also looked tired but were glad that Lucas was safe and sound. I'm going to go on an eating binge after this. Who cares about having a slim body after what we've been through? Emma said, and she sat down on the ground to rest. Rex took out his phone to check if any of his ex-girlfriends replied. His face drooped after seeing that there were none. Riley frowned as he had the same doubts as Thorne Blackmore. It seemed so pointless for Pak Min-jae. Lucas had a hunch that it must have something to do with the Robertson family. Has anyone seen any of the awakened teams from the Robertson family? He asked. The other team members tried to recall who they've seen when all of this happened. They glanced around them, looking at the awakened teams that survived and those who were dead. But they couldn't find anyone from the Robertson family, which was unusual as the Robertson family had employed lots of awakened teams under them. Director! Riley waved and shouted at Rodney. Rodney, who was arranging the reorganization of the troops, looked over. Thorne Blackmore also glanced in the same direction. Interesting, he said and gave out a grin. Chapter 56. The Southern Pillar. Were you able to activate men from the Robertson family? Riley asked Rodney. Robertson family? Rodney thought for a moment. He glanced at the surroundings, and then at his secretary. His secretary took out his phone and had confirmation from the operations staff. Yes. None of the awakened teams from the Robertson family showed up. None? Don't they know it's a chargeable offense not to turn up for the activation? Rodney fumed and he took out his phone. He tapped on the contact for Edric Robertson. The contact number you've called is no longer in use. Rodney ended the call in anger. He scrolled and called the governor's number. It rang and rang with no one picking it up. Rodney frowned. Something bad might have happened to the governor. He thought for a moment and glanced over at Riley's team. Thorne Blackmore was having a conversation with Riley. He placed his hand on Riley's shoulder with a smile. You must be Riley, SSS level Lightning Awakened. Adept Mastery. The Army needs someone like you. Thorne Blackmore nodded his head approvingly and said. Riley shook his head as he wasn't too interested. Being with the team meant that he had freedom to choose which missions to take on. But in the Army, you didn't have much of a choice. Thorne Blackmore frowned and sighed. He pulled back his hand and looked at the other team members. If only they had powerful abilities like SSS-level Lightning. He thought silently to himself. Thanks so much for the hint, Riley. Rodney said. It's not me. Lucas figured it out. Riley said and pointed at Lucas. Lucas shrugged and said, It's coincidence. I got lots of love for the Robertson family. Makes it obvious to me when I don't see any of them. Rodney nodded at Lucas and said, But I don't have the capacity to deal with Edric Robertson now. I need your team to go to the governor's residence to check on his status. I can't contact him. And of course, there will be a reward for this mission. As the director of the Awaken Center, Rodney knew that the briefcase was in the governor's hands. He had to make sure it was safe. The governor? Riley frowned at the information. This meant that there might be something more sinister at play. He glanced over at his team members, waiting for their opinion. Rex, Emma, Harrianto, and Lucas nodded their heads. We will go, Riley said and shook hands with Rodney. They left the wall immediately, and they passed through some of the most horrific scenes they could ever imagine. Bodies, parts, and blood were strewn all over the place. Their boots became sticky as they walked through areas that were soaked in blood. When they got into the armored car, Riley said, Replenish your energy. I'm not sure what to expect next. Birum. The engine started and the armored car left, leaving a trail of black smoke behind it. Lucas joined in with the other team members and munched on his energy bar and drank some water. North of the city underground base. 50 floors underground. There were guards heavily armed standing outside of an office. And beside the office was a lift that enabled them to go down even further into the underground base. Inside the office, Patricia's parents were on duty, and they were worried about Patricia's safety. Her father, Charles, was sitting in his chair, with a desk in front of him, piled up with files and documents. He was looking at the last message she sent him a few minutes ago. I'm at the underground shelter. Everything is fine except for some commotion among those inside. He gave out a sigh of relief as that meant the wall hadn't been breached. Charles glanced over at his wife, Wendy, who was blonde and had beautiful blue eyes like Patricia. She was standing in front of a control panel, with screens that showed what was happening in crucial areas of the underground base. "Why do we have to be here when the city is under such threat?" Wendy asked as she paced around. Charles shook his head and said, "Orders are orders. Besides, I'm sure the Southern Pillar is crucial to the survival of the Southern Battle Administration area. But what exactly is it? You and I have been guarding this place for years, and we don't even know what it does," Wendy said in frustration. She would rather be out there protecting the city than staying here guarding something that no one has seen before. Charles shook his head and got up from his seat. He walked over to Wendy, placed his hand around her waist, wanting to comfort her. Out of the corner of his eyes, he saw something unusual happening. In many of the screens, the guards got out of the screens very suddenly, as if they were yanked out of position by someone. He let go of his hand and walked closer to the control panel. "What?" Wendy asked as she saw Charles staring intensely at the screens in front of him. She turned and looked. At the screen that showed what was happening outside of their office, the guards disappeared out of sight. Just like the others. They glanced at each other and then the door to their office opened. A man in dark armor with a lotus emblem on the left chest walked in. He was holding a briefcase in his hand. And with him, a soldier dressed in an untidy uniform followed the man. "Lotus Man, get it over and done with quickly. They have the access code to where the Southern Pillar is stored. I don't want to have to get it from General Zephyr." The man in dark armor narrowed his eyes and stared at the soldier in untidy uniform. "Leroy, I told you to call me Ashen," Ashen said and raised his hands. Charles pushed Wendy away and hurled a fireball at Ashen. When the fireball came close to Ashen, a dark opening appeared out of nowhere and the fireball went into it. The dark opening closed back up and disappeared, as if the fireball had never existed. "Wendy, run. Let General Zephyr know," Charles shouted at Wendy. He didn't know why the alarms didn't sound. Crack. Chapter 57. My Family. Ashen lunged at Charles and gave him a left hook to his chest. The sound of bones cracking could be heard as Charles's ribcage fractured, and Charles was hurled onto his desk. The pile of files and documents flew into the air. Charles slammed into the desk and broke it in half. "Charles!" Wendy shouted out to him, wanting to help him. Charles shook his head at her, and he quickly hurled a fireball at Leroy, who was coming for her. Leroy pulled his left arm with his right hand. The skin on his left arm stretched out like a flap, and when the fireball hit it, the fireball bounced off the flap. Wendy took the chance and ran for the door. "Whip!" Leroy whipped his hands at her. His hands became long and shot out at her. Thud! One of the hands grabbed onto Wendy's ankle and made her trip. She placed her hand onto Leroy's, and white mist appeared. "Arg! Bitch!" Leroy cried out in pain as his hand was frozen from Wendy's ice ability. He pulled back his free hand and whipped it at Wendy's face. "That will teach you to behave," Leroy shouted. But Wendy let go of his hand and leaped away. "What are you doing? Stop fooling around and get her." Ashen wasn't too pleased with Leroy. "Tooey!" Leroy spat on the ground and ran out the door, chasing after Wendy. Charles made use of this opportunity. With his hands raised, he shot out blue flames at Ashen while he was looking away. However, with a swift leap to the side, the blue flames missed. Charles's body then flared up and he was engulfed in blue flames. He lunged at Ashen with a shoulder charge. Ashen's armor turned red-hot when the blue flames got near it. Beads of sweat dripped down from Ashen's forehead as the temperature was now unbearable for a normal person. Just when Charles thought that he had Ashen, a dark opening as big as an adult man appeared out of thin air behind Ashen. Ashen leaped and got into the dark opening. The dark opening closed as Charles came near. Thud! Charles smashed onto the steel wall and caused a depression in it. He turned around and Ashen was nowhere to be found. "Using flames on your body." adapting the powers and coming out with new ways to use them, mark of someone with expert mastery.
I'm impressed.
Charles glanced around at the surroundings, on full alert. There was no one in sight. Seconds went by and the blue flames engulfing his body were dying down as his energy drained. Ashen was waiting for his energy to run out. Charles took a few steps to the side, getting closer to the door. He took a leap when he was near enough. But a dark opening appeared outside the door and Ashen lunged at Charles with a flying kick. Thud! The kick hurled Charles back into the office. Charles tumbled across the room until he smashed onto the wall on the other end of the entrance. Meanwhile, Ashen lifted his feet and used his hand to pat the flames that were burning on his boots. He walked towards Charles with a smirk. Charles helped himself up and rested against the wall with a smirk back at Ashen. "You think I'll let you get the access code?" he said as he raised his right hand, placing it with its palm near his face. Charles glanced over to his desk, which was now a mess. A family photo with himself, Wendy and Patricia in it with all of them giving out huge smiles, was now tattered and its glass frame shattered. Charles smiled faintly, turned back and stared at Ashen. Before Ashen could react, blue flames shot out from his palm and burned his head. Charles's body twitched at the pain. Plop! His body slowly slumped and fell to the side. The flames didn't stop burning, and soon, Charles's whole body was burning in the blue flames. Charles's hand moved, trying to get to the family photo. But he couldn't as his life force went out and he lay motionless. Pathetic! Ashen picked up the photo and quickly left the room. With Charles dead, Wendy and General Zephyr would be the other two people with the access code to the southern pillar. Along the way to the governor's residence, Lucas saw how the usually bustling streets of the city were now deserted. There were things left strewn around, most likely dropped by their owners when they scurried to the underground shelter. Shops were closed and some had nailed wooden planks onto the shutters, trying to keep out the looters. A few men appeared with weapons in their hands when the armored car went near them. They raised their guns but quickly put them down when they recognized who was inside. Riley could blast them into smithereens if he wanted to. Hurriedly they got out of the way of the armored car. As the car went past, they coughed and had to cover their noses from the smoke coming out of the exhaust. Finally, they got to the governor's residence, and they stopped at the gate entrance. The guards were all dead, lying on the ground motionlessly. "Get ready," Riley said, and the team moved into formation. Rex went to the front with Riley behind him. Emma and Lucas fanned out to the sides, with Harrianto standing between them. Behind the gate was a huge garden with a lush grass patch. However, the green grass was now splattered with blood and bodies of the guards lay on it. Lucas didn't have a good feeling about it. Everything so far couldn't have been accomplished by Edric Robertson alone. Someone else must have been helping him. Rustle. A rustling sound stopped his thoughts, and he glanced over to where the rustling sound came from. It was a demonic beast that looked like a warthog. The fire warthog, with its glowing tail that was burning in flames, wagged from left to right. Huge tusks protruding from its mouth were covered in blood as it munched on the body on the ground. The fire warthog sniffed the air and looked up. Roar! When it saw Lucas and the others, it gave out a roar and charged at Lucas. Chapter 58. Fire Warthog. The fire warthog had flames blowing out of its nose as it charged forward, and the flames covered its body. Lucas held his hand to the ground. An ice wall rose from the ground and the fire warthog smashed into it. Tremble. The fire warthog took out a huge chunk of ice from the ice wall and caused it to shake and tremble. It roared and the flames on its body turned blue. Thud. The fire warthog charged again, and this time it took out another huge chunk of the ice wall. Its flames did their job next, and the ice wall started to melt. With his experience from the prior battle, Lucas knew that this warthog was at least as strong as the skeletal tiger, even though its size was only half the height of Lucas. This demonic beast is as strong as the skeletal tiger, Lucas shouted and warned the other team members. How is this possible? Why is there a demonic beast here? Rex questioned as he hurled a boulder at the fire warthog. Boom! The boulder missed and it landed on the ground, causing the soil and grass to fly into the air. The fire warthog gave out a roar and it turned its focus to Rex. When it tried to charge at Rex, it was surprised that it couldn't move its hind legs. Lucas had used his shadow and grabbed onto the shadow of the fire warthog's hind legs. The fire warthog tried to struggle free, but it could barely move. Wham! Riley unleashed his lightning strike at the fire warthog. The lightning strike hit. The fire warthog gave out a cry as the lightning strike did its damage. It thrashed around as it felt its innards electrocuted and pain coursed through the fire warthog's body. But it wasn't enough to kill it. The fire warthog gave out a roar and the blue flames covering its body burned more vigorously and extended further outwards. Emma blew her red poison smoke at it next, but the red poison was burnt by the blue flames covering the warthog's body instead. Using his ice ability, Lucas conjured a huge ice spike half his height and hurled it at the warthog. Thud! The ice spike hit the body of the fire warthog but couldn't penetrate its thick skin. Lucas's attack angered the fire warthog, and it turned its head toward him. It raised its front legs and stomped on the ground. Whoosh! Pillars of blue flames emerged from the ground underneath Lucas. Lucas quickly leaped away. Lucas! Riley and the other team members shouted and were relieved when they saw him dodging the pillar of blue flame. However, it was not over for Lucas as when he landed. Another pillar of blue flames came out of the ground and this time he got caught in it. His dark matter vault armor turned blue as it tried to protect Lucas from the flames. The dark matter vault armor turned dark instead as the flames started burning it. Lucas quickly used his ice ability and covered himself in ice. He rolled away from the pillar of blue flame. When he got up, everyone gasped in horror when they saw that his face, hands and parts of his body were burnt. "I'm all right," Lucas said as he stared at the fire warthog. And to everyone's surprise, his wounds started healing immediately. They gave out a sigh of relief when they saw it. However, it was still not over. The fire warthog charged at Lucas with its blue flames. It was so fast that it left a trail of blue shimmer behind. Lucas leaped up into the air and this time he wasn't going to hold back anymore. "Come on." Riley's hand glowed brightly in a white glow as he charged up his lightning strike impatiently. After witnessing what had happened, Riley knew that his lightning ability was the only thing that could kill the warthog. To his surprise, a blinding white flash came from above. Lucas's hands glowed with the same white glow as lightning flickered on his hands. Slowly the white glow became bigger as more lightning accumulated in his hands. Riley, Rex, Emma and Harrianto couldn't believe their eyes. How was this possible? A person with 3 abilities? Riley was the most astonished among them. Someone like himself could only accumulate a lightning strike on one of his hands at one go. And with one of his hands accumulating lightning strikes, it would already take up so much of his energy. Yet, right in front of his eyes, Lucas was using both of his hands to accumulate lightning strikes. "Watch out!" they shouted as they saw the fire warthog unleash the blue flames that engulfed its body. The blue flames shot at Lucas, who was in the air. An orange glow appeared in front of Lucas and a dark figure appeared. Sheba opened its mouth, and it swallowed the blue flames in a mouthful. Burp. It gave out a burp and landed on the ground. The fire warthog, now without the blue flames protecting it, took a few steps back. A flash of white glow appeared and blinded it. Its hairs stood on end as it heard crackling sound. Wham! 2 lightning strikes shot at the fire warthog from Lucas's hands. This time, the fire warthog's skin got fried without the blue flames protection. The smell of charred meat immediately filled the air. Sheba grinned and lunged at the fire warthog. The fire warthog swiped its head to and fro, trying to use its huge tusk to stop Sheba. But Sheba just opened its huge mouth and shot out a huge fireball of blue flames at the fire warthog. Boom! The fireball of blue flames hit the fire warthog and caused an explosion. Squeals of pain could be heard as the fire warthog thrashed around in the blue flames. When the blue flames died down, the fire warthog shuddered in fear as it saw Sheba and Lucas walking towards it. Lucas raised his hands with lightning flickering on them. Wham! The lightning strike shot at the fire warthog, and the head of the fire warthog splattered into pieces. A familiar sound erupted in Lucas's mind. Ding! Slaughter points plus 700. Current slaughter points 1200/20,000. Host level 5. Current abilities 5. Lucas felt a tap on his shoulder. It was Riley. Well done. But what's with the lightning ability and that? He said and pointed at Sheba. Chapter 59. Welcome Sheba. Lucas slapped the back of his head and gave Riley a smile.
I'm sorry.
This here is my summon beast, Sheba. And yes, I have summoner and lightning abilities, he said as he squatted down and patted Sheba. What? How is that possible? Riley and the other team members still couldn't believe it and gasped in astonishment. Even though they had just witnessed Lucas using the two abilities, it still seemed surreal for them to witness someone having so many abilities. I've wanted to keep it a secret as Sheba is unique. And as for my abilities, Lucas said and passed his ID to Riley. Riley looked at Lucas's ID and frowned. For Lucas's awakened ability was something he had never seen before. Haryanto, Rex and Emma also had a glance at Lucas's awakened ID card. I knew he was someone special the first time I saw him, Rex said proudly. Riley rolled his eyes at him. He still remembered how Rex was impatient with them having to go find Lucas at his place. Haryanto and Emma were happy that they had someone like Lucas on their team. Riley then glanced over at Sheba, and he nodded. I sure haven't seen any demonic beast like Sheba before. Haryanto, do you have any idea what type of demonic beast Sheba is? Haryanto, being the knowledgeable one on the team, circled Sheba and inspected Sheba carefully. Finally, he stopped and shook his head. I've never seen anything like it before. We might need to go to the Center Administration's archive department to figure it out. Riley sighed when he heard the words, Center Administration. The Southern Battle Administration area had little to no influence within the Center Administration, and the governance didn't pay much attention to the Southern Battle Administration area as it had little resources like mines and talented awakened. For them to have the chance to visit the Center Administration would be such a tall order. Riley looked at Lucas's ID card and a thought appeared in his mind. How would that be possible? He stopped himself and thought silently in his mind. He looked up and returned the ID card to Lucas. Sheba glanced at the other team members with a grin. It got excited and jumped around them. And when it got near Rex and Emma, it stopped and ran towards them. Rex grinned and squatted down with open arms. But Sheba didn't stop and ran past him towards Emma. It snuggled its head beside Emma's legs and Rex stood up fuming. Humph. I've never liked cute animals anyway. Lucas also shook his head at Sheba. So much for being my buddy, huh, he thought to himself. He sighed when Sheba looked in his direction and gave him a huge grin. Riley patted Rex's back and said, now that we've got that cleared up, we still have a mission to complete. The team moved in on full alert towards the governor's residence. This time they didn't meet any other enemies. All they saw were trails of blood and the bodies of guards and officials lying motionless within the building. Rex, take position, Riley said. They stood on both sides of the door to the governor's office. Rex turned his body into rocks and stormed in. Lucas and the other team members followed, ready to strike if anything happened. There was, however, only the body of the governor inside. Lucas walked close and inspected the body. His hand is missing. Someone had cut it off, he said as he lifted the governor's arm, showing the clean-cut wound below the governor's wrist. It seemed odd to Lucas. The governor wasn't a powerful awakened. For someone to be able to storm through the governor's residence, it would have been easy for them to kill the governor. The only reason he could think of for cutting the governor's hand off was to torture the governor for something like information. What information could they be after? He pondered. Riley came over and inspected it. You are right. He took pictures of the governor's body and sent them to Rodney. Ring. Rodney called back immediately. Riley, this is very important. Our lives depend on it. I'll up the reward to $100,000 and a year's supply of a demonic beast core daily. Riley could hear Rodney's anxiety through the phone as Rodney spoke with a hastened pace. Whatever the briefcase was, it must have been very important. We are on it. Riley didn't mind the extra reward. Everyone got to work immediately. There was a safe inside the office, but it was left open. The governor must have taken out the briefcase, and before he could escape, he was killed. Haryanto saw the computer on the governor's desk, and he got to work. He used his ability with his hands hovering over the monitor. A white glow appeared from his hands, and it darted into the monitor. The monitor turned on miraculously. It displayed the footage of the CCTV. A man in dark armor was able to appear out of a dark opening and killed the guards. He even opened a dark opening in the air, and the fire warthog came out of it. It wreaked havoc with its powers, and the man in dark armor proceeded to enter the governor's office. The footage switched to the CCTV inside the governor's office. Look, is that something like our team's insignia? Maybe we can check who the man is from this. Lucas noticed the lotus emblem on the man's armor and pointed it out. Riley and the other team members frowned and thought for a moment. They shook their heads as they had never seen any awakened team wearing something with a lotus emblem. The man proceeded to kill the governor, took the briefcase and sliced the governor's hand off. Lucas's hunch was close. The man must have needed the hand for something. Send the video to our phones, Riley said, and Haryanto did it immediately. He forwarded the video to Rodney. Rodney's phone buzzed and he picked it up. His face turned sullen when he saw Riley's message. We didn't find any briefcase. Watch the video below. Rodney's face turned white when he saw the man's lotus emblem on his armor. And when he saw the man killing off the governor, taking away the briefcase and cutting the governor's hand off, he had to steady himself against the wall. Shadow Lotus. He knew what the appearance of Shadow Lotus meant. Tremble. The earth shook again. Chapter 60 Hope. Rodney's heart sank even further when he heard the tremble. But he took a deep breath and did what he had to. He called Riley as he walked towards the edge of the wall. Riley, gather whoever you can and get to the underground base in the north of the city. I will send you the coordinates later. They are after the southern pillar. These bastards are called the Shadow Lotus. Don't underestimate them. Stop them with whatever you've got. He didn't even wait for Riley to reply and ended the call. After he sent the coordinates of the underground base to Riley, he prepared himself for what was to come. Soldiers and the awakened teams that survived looked anxiously at each other. The tremble not only shook the earth, but also the minds and hearts of them. They looked out into the distance and saw figures coming towards them. Skeletal tigers and fire warthogs came charging at them. Boom! A demonic beast that was as tall as the wall appeared. It looked like a skeletal tiger but with wings that were in the form of a bat. Thorn. Please tell me you can deal with that, Rodney said and glanced over to Thorn Blackmore. However, Thorn Blackmore was just as in despair as he was. That might be a abyssal-tiered demonic beast, he said with his face looking stern. Abyssal-tiered demonic beast. Rodney murmured to himself. There were only records of demonic beasts which were at abyssal-tiered level, but none had been cited for so long. And yet, they would have to face one together with high-tiered demonic beasts. Rodney started reciting whatever prayers he knew and prayed for the survival of those in the underground shelter. Meanwhile, Riley looked at the coordinates of the underground base. It wasn't too far, and they might still be able to salvage the situation. He thought, everyone move out. We have to get to the underground base to protect the southern pillar. Lucas nodded and followed the other team members. Riley continued to brief them on what Rodney had told him as they got to the armored car. What is the southern pillar? Why is it so important? Lucas asked. I only know it's crucial for our survival, Riley replied. Everyone else also nodded. Find whatever help we can? But there's no one left. Rex interjected with his doubt. There might be, Emma said and paused. Riley knew what Emma wanted to say, and he also hesitated. What? Rex asked again. Those guarding the underground shelter. Lucas gave him the answer. Rex also frowned and kept his mouth shut. Those guarding the underground shelter were mostly individuals that were too weak to be able to join an awakened team. And other than that, they were students like Patricia, who hadn't even learned about combat in the Awakened Academy. Seeing that no one wanted to make the decision, Lucas gave his suggestion. We go to the underground shelter, ask for volunteers. And we only take in those that are good enough. No one from high school or the Awakened Academy should be considered. Give it 5 minutes and we leave. Riley and the other team members nodded their heads as it sounded like a plan. Underground base. Wendy looked back, and when Leroy appeared behind her, she quickly hastened her pace. She was only a few steps away from General Zephyr's location. Whip. Leroy whipped his hand that stretched like rubber, trying to grab onto her ankle. Ice spikes rose from the ground with every step Wendy took. Leroy's hand swerved and avoided the ice spikes. When his hands got near again, Wendy was ready and ice extended out from her hands, covering Leroy's. It froze his hands and trapped his hands with the thick ice. "Arg! You bitch!" he screamed in anger. Wendy then took the opportunity and pressed her palm against the security entrance. Beep! The thick steel doors slid open, and Wendy ran into it. Crack! The ice holding Leroy's hands cracked, and he whipped it at Wendy again. His hands passed through the steel doors, but it was stopped when the steel doors slid closed. Leroy could feel his fingers brush against Wendy's ankle. Damn it! He cursed out loud as he knew that he was so close. Wendy put her palm at the second security entrance, and it slid open after giving out a beep. General! Intruders! Wendy shouted as she entered the living quarters of General Zephyr. General Zephyr was on his bed in his sleep after his shift. Upon hearing Wendy's voice, he opened his eyes and sat up. Lights turned on from his motion, and he immediately put on his uniform. He was fit and had a stern look with a gray mustache. Wendy! General Zephyr was surprised to see her injured. After all these years in the underground base, it had been uneventful. He quickly pressed the alarm button that was on his wall. But nothing happened. There was no wailing of the alarm to activate everyone in the base. Thud. Something hit onto the security doors, giving out a muted thud. General Zephyr narrowed his eyes and got ready. Boom! Finally, the security doors gave way, and they were blown off. The steel door flew at General Zephyr. General! Wendy shouted as she saw the steel doors coming at him. White flames appeared and engulfed General Zephyr's body. The temperature weirdly didn't rise, but it felt cold instead. Redefining what the abilities could do, a mark of someone at master-level mastery. Wendy thought to herself. The steel doors, when they touched onto the white flame, turned into liquid steel immediately. Ashen, you better get your ass here right now. Leroy was standing at the entrance and thought silently to himself. General Zephyr raised his right hand, with the palm facing Leroy. Whoosh! The white flames shot at Leroy's body. Leroy stretched his body long and held onto the ceiling with his hands, and his body bent to the side with a curve. The white flames missed and flew past Leroy's body. Leroy's body bounced back to its original position, and General Zephyr seized the opportunity to lunge at Leroy with his fist. Bladder!